The first thing Sarah noticed when she started working at Graceland wasn't the sparkling jumpsuits or the gold records, though there were plenty of those. It was the quiet hum of confusion that seemed to permeate the air, a low, level buzz of bewilderment that always circled around one person: Elvis Presley. And that bewilderment almost always came down to his sleep schedule. Sarah was just out of high school, bright-eyed and eager, thrilled to be a junior assistant fetching coffees and answering phones, soaking up every bit of the king's magnetic presence. She'd always imagined Graceland as a non-stop party, a whirlwind of rock and roll and celebrity. It was sometimes, but mostly, it was surprisingly domestic, if a domesticity involved 100 acres and a house full of people whose lives revolved around the most famous man on earth. And that man rarely seemed to sleep when he was supposed to. "He's up again," she'd hear a maid whisper in the kitchen, checking her watch. "Must have only been a few hours," or "Don't bother him, he just finally went down." This would be at, say, 3 in the afternoon. Sarah quickly learned the rhythm or lack thereof of Elvis's days and nights. He might stay up till dawn, walking around the grounds, playing piano in the living room, watching movies on his private screens. Then he might sleep for a few hours, wake up, have a late breakfast, and be wide awake and energetic, ready for meetings or photo calls, while everyone else was already winding down. Or he might sleep until sunset, emerge fully dressed and ready for the night, treating 8 p.m. like morning. It baffled everyone. Colonel Parker, his manager, would often sigh dramatically during phone calls. The boy's on his own clock. God bless him. Trying to schedule him is like trying to nail jelly to a tree. The Memphis Mafia, the close-knit group of friends and family who lived and worked with Elvis, just shrugged and adapted. They lived on Elvis time, which meant they had to be ready for anything at any hour. If Elvis decided to go horseback riding at 2 a.m., they went horseback riding. If he wanted a new car delivered at midnight, they made it happen. Sarah found herself fascinated. She tried to track it in her head, mentally charting his wake and sleep cycles. There was no pattern she could discern. It wasn't like he was always awake at night or always sleeping in the day. It was erratic, unpredictable. Sometimes he'd be up all night, for several nights in a row, buzzing with energy. Then he'd crash for a day and a half. Other times he'd nap sporadically like a cat, never truly committing to a full 8 hours. Does he ever just sleep like a normal person? Sarah once dared to ask Patty, one of the older, wiser housekeepers, as they folded laundry in the utility room. Patty chuckled a dry, knowing sound. "Normal, honey. Nothing about this place is normal. And certainly not the king. He's always been like that since he was a boy, I hear. Just wired differently." She paused, stacking a pile of crisp white towels. "Some say it's the pressure, can't sleep with the world watching you." Or maybe, offered another staff member, Shirley, who walked in with an armful of freshly pressed shirts. "He's a vampire." She winked, and Sarah laughed. But the thought lingered. He did come alive at night. His eyes, though sometimes shadowed, seemed to sparkle with a particular intensity under the moon. Sarah had only seen him a few times up close. Once he'd walked into the kitchen when she was getting a glass of water, dressed in silk pajamas, his hair perfectly coiffed, even at what was technically 4 a.m. He'd smiled a lazy, charming smile that made her heart flutter and said, "Mornin', darlin'." Then he'd poured himself a glass of milk and wandered off into the study, the faint sounds of a gospel record beginning to drift from under the door. Another time he'd been wide awake at noon, booming laughter echoing from the pool house where he was throwing a spirited game of touch football with some of the mafia. He'd looked utterly refreshed, full of life, while everyone else was wiping sweat from their brows. It was more than just a strange habit. It was a defining characteristic of his life at Graceland. It dictated everything: when meals were served, when meetings were held, when the gates opened for his late-night drives. It was an invisible force, a silent conductor to the grand symphony of Elvis Presley's life. And Sarah, new to this world, found herself drawn into its mystery. She watched, she listened, and she wondered, what could possibly explain such a consistently inconsistent pattern? Was it just eccentricity? Or was there something more profound, something hidden behind the king's strange sleep schedule? She had a feeling, a little prickle of intuition, that it was the latter, and a growing curiosity made her want to find out. The more Sarah observed, the deeper the mystery of Elvis's sleep patterns became. It wasn't just erratic, it felt deliberate, almost like a carefully guarded secret. The staff might grumble, but they never truly questioned it, as if it were simply another quirk of genius, like a painter's insistence on a specific shade of blue, or a writer's need for absolute silence. "He's a creative spirit," said Lamar, one of the older, loyal members of the Memphis Mafia. When Sarah delicately broached the subject, they were in the TV room, Lamar dozing in a recliner, while Sarah dusted the seemingly endless collection of records. Artists, they don't work on a 9 to 5. Inspiration hits when it hits. Could be 2 in the afternoon, could be 2 in the morning. Sarah considered this. It made some sense. Maybe he was writing songs in the dead of night or choreographing new moves. But she never heard him actively creating music during these odd hours. Sometimes she'd hear him playing the piano, soft melodies that sounded more like musings than new compositions. Other theories floated around. "He's got insomnia, plain and simple," offered Dave, the night security guard, during a coffee break in the kitchen. Too much on his mind. The tours, the movies, the pressure. How would you sleep if millions of people were hanging on your every move? This theory felt plausible, even heartbreaking. The weight of fame could certainly be a heavy burden. Then there were the wilder ideas. It's a secret government mission. Shirley whispered conspiratorially one afternoon, cleaning the living room. "He's a spy, I'm telling you. That's why he travels so much. Why he's always up at odd hours training or getting secret intel." Sarah scoffed, but a tiny part of her wondered. Elvis did love police badges and had a fascination with law enforcement. It was far-fetched, but in the world of Elvis, anything felt possible. One particularly bizarre theory came from a new chef, who only lasted a few weeks. "He's got an alien communicator hidden in the basement," the chef claimed, wide-eyed, talking to them at night. "That's why he's never tired." Sarah simply nodded, trying not to laugh. That chef was quickly replaced. Sarah continued to track his schedule in her head. She started noticing subtle things. When he was awake late at night, the house would go quiet. Save for his own movements, he wouldn't be loud. In fact, he'd be unusually subdued. She'd hear the faint click of a door, a soft shuffle of footsteps, sometimes the distant hum of a car engine starting up only to fade away into the Memphis night. He'd often be gone for an hour or two, returning just as silently. Where did he go? And why was it always so hush, hush? One evening, Sarah was working late, organizing fan mail in the office near the front of the house. The house was mostly dark, most of the staff having gone home. Only Dave, the night guard, was on duty, and a few of the Mafia members were upstairs in their rooms. Around 1 a.m., she heard the soft thud of footsteps descending the grand staircase. She froze, peeking out of the office door. It was Elvis. He was dressed in dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low, obscuring much of his face. He looked normal. Not like the glittering king, but like any man out for a late-night drive. He held a small, worn leather bag in one hand. He moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze sweeping the darkened hall. As if checking if anyone was awake, Sarah ducked back into the office. Holding her breath, she heard the front door creak open and close softly. A few moments later, she heard the distinctive rumble of his black Cadillac pulling away from the front porch, its headlights cutting brief swaths through the trees before disappearing down the driveway. He was gone again, and this time she saw it with her own eyes. It wasn't just a strange sleep schedule. It was a clandestine activity. What was in the bag? Where was he going at this hour? So discreetly. curiosity, already piqued, now felt like a live wire humming beneath her skin. This wasn't about insomnia or artistic temperament. This was something else entirely. And Sarah, despite the warning she'd heard about not prying into the king's affairs, felt an undeniable pull to understand. She had a feeling the answer wasn't going to be about alien communicators or government spies. It was going to be something much more human. The late-night excursions continued, observed by Sarah with increasing fascination. Each time Elvis slipped out, quiet as a shadow, her imagination spun tales. Was he meeting someone? A secret love? Was he involved in some kind of vigilante justice like a real-life superhero? The more she thought about it, the more absurd some ideas became, yet the sheer secrecy of it kept her guessing. One night the unexpected happened. Sarah was feeling restless. She'd stayed late again, finishing up some paperwork, and decided to take a walk around the Graceland grounds before heading to her small apartment in the staff quarters. The Memphis night was unusually warm, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant croak of frogs. She walked past the stables, the swimming pool, enjoying the peaceful quiet. As she rounded the corner near the back gate, she saw it. The black Cadillac, usually parked proudly by the main house, was pulled off to the side, partially obscured by a thick grove of trees. And standing by the car was Elvis, not quite as hidden as he usually was. He wasn't looking around, his back was turned to her, and he was focused on something. Sarah instinctively froze behind a large oak tree. She watched as Elvis opened the trunk of the Cadillac. Her eyes widened. It wasn't empty. It was filled with boxes, brown cardboard boxes, neatly stacked. They looked like food supplies, maybe even toys. What was he doing with all those boxes? As she watched, a beat-up old pickup truck rattled down the long driveway and stopped quietly near Elvis's car. An elderly man, his face weathered and kind, emerged from the truck. He looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place him. He certainly wasn't anyone from the usual Graceland crowd. Elvis didn't speak loudly. He nodded to the man, a warm, genuine smile on his face, even in the faint moonlight. He began to unload the boxes from his trunk, stacking them carefully into the back of the pickup truck. The old man helped him, moving with a surprising spryness. Sarah strained her ears, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. It was too quiet, just murmurs. She heard Elvis say something about the children and enough for the week. The old man nodded, his voice gruff but grateful. God bless you, son. You always come through. Son, this old man was not a regular associate. This was something different. Once the boxes were transferred, Elvis reached into his own pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to the old man, who looked at it with a mix of surprise and humility. The man started to protest, shaking his head. No, you don't need to, the old man insisted, trying to push it back. But Elvis gently, firmly placed it back in his hand. Please, George, it's for them and for you. Keep the lights on, keep them warm, don't you worry about it. His voice was soft, compassionate, utterly devoid. This was the real Elvis. Unguarded, the old man's eyes glistened. He clasped Elvis's hand, holding it tight. Your true smiled, a gentle, almost shy smile. Just doing my part, George, just my part. They talked for a few more minutes. A quiet, almost intimate exchange. Then the old man got back into his truck, the engine sputtering to life, and drove away. Elvis watched him go, then slowly closed his Cadillac's trunk. He leaned against the car for a moment, looking up at the sky, a deep sigh escaping his lips. He looked tired, but also profoundly peaceful. Sarah stayed hidden, her mind reeling. Boxes of supplies. This wasn't a spy mission, or an alien rendezvous, or even just a lonely night drive. This was something benevolent, something truly good. He wasn't sleeping because he was busy. He was busy helping people. In the dead of night, away from the flashing cameras and the screaming fans, the king of rock and roll was quietly, secretly engaging in acts of profound kindness. The realization hit Sarah with the force of a tidal wave. The strange sleep schedule wasn't an eccentricity, it was a sacrifice. It was the chosen camouflage for a secret life of charity. And she had just witnessed a sliver of it. Her heart swelled with a mixture of awe and profound respect. The enigma of Elvis Presley had just deepened, but in the most beautiful way imaginable. The memory of what she'd seen kept Sarah awake that night, long after Elvis had silently slipped back into the main house. Her mind replayed the scene. The quiet transaction, the hushed voices, the genuine gratitude in the old man's eyes, and the humble compassion in Elvis's completely reframed everything she thought she knew about his peculiar habits. The next day, Sarah felt different. The usual daily grind of Graceland seemed infused with a new layer of meaning. When the other staff complained about Elvis's unpredictable hours, Sarah would just smile faintly. They didn't know, they didn't see the silent good he was doing. She found herself paying closer attention, not just to his sleep, but to his subtle movements, the little signals he gave off. When he was scheduled for a particularly busy day of meetings or recording, he'd try to squeeze in a longer nap in the afternoon. But if his daytime schedule was light, he seemed to embrace the night more fully. She noticed he often ate light meals during the day, reserving heartier fare for his night meals, which could be served at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. He always kept a supply of non-perishable food items and sometimes even blankets or clothing tucked away in a storeroom off the kitchen, items that would mysteriously disappear overnight. Sarah began to piece together fragments of information. The old man George, she later learned from casual eavesdropping, ran a small, struggling orphanage or community center on the outskirts of Memphis. It was barely funded, reliant on donations and the sheer willpower of its caretakers. It wasn't a place that would ever make headlines or attract big-name sponsors. It was the kind of place that quietly fought to survive day by day. This knowledge painted Elvis's actions in an even brighter light. He wasn't just giving money. He was directly supporting a vital, overlooked cause. And he was doing it himself, hand-delivering the aid, maintaining a personal connection. The night world of Elvis Presley wasn't about glitz or fame. It was about anonymity, about quiet service. He was protecting the people he helped from unwanted media attention, and he was protecting himself from being seen as simply a celebrity philanthropist. He wasn't doing it for headlines, he was doing it because he cared. Sarah noticed he wasn't always alone on these late-night excursions. Sometimes one or two of the Memphis Mafia members, typically the quietest and most dependable ones, like Red or Sonny, would accompany him. They would move with the same hushed efficiency, their faces serious, their presence a silent testament to their loyalty and understanding. They were his inner circle, not just in fame, but in his secret acts of kindness. She often wondered if his family knew, if Priscilla or his parents were aware of the full extent of his nocturnal activities. She suspected they did, at least partially. There was an unspoken understanding, a collective agreement to protect this private, sacred part of his life. One chilly autumn evening, Sarah was in the living room, tidying up after an impromptu gathering. It was late, perhaps midnight. Elvis was sitting at the piano, his back to her, playing a gospel hymn, soft and mournful. He wasn't singing, just letting the notes fill the grand room. The sound was comforting, almost like a lullaby. She paused her work, captivated by the raw emotion in his playing. He wasn't performing. He was simply being. After a few minutes, he stopped the silence, heavy but not uncomfortable. He turned slowly on the piano bench, catching her eye. For a moment, she worried. He might be annoyed that she was still there, but his expression was soft, contemplative. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Not a question, but an observation. Sarah felt her cheeks flush slightly. "Just finishing up, Mr. Presley." She always called him that out of respect, though most of the inner circle called him Elvis. He offered a slight smile. "Just Elvis, darling." He paused, his gaze lingering on her as if seeing her for the first time. It's a quiet house at this hour, good for thinking. Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond. Was this a test? Was he hinting at something? He looked back at the piano keys, then back at her. Some folks find it hard to understand, he said, his voice dropping slightly, why I keep these hours. He gestured vaguely around the silent house. They think it's just restless energy or a crazy schedule. He met her gaze directly. Sometimes a man's gotta do what he's gotta do when no one else is looking. It wasn't a full confession, but it was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging his secret world. It was a subtle invitation, a hint that he knew she was observing, and perhaps that he trusted her to understand. Sarah felt a thrill run through her. The king had seen her, and he had, in his own way, led her a little further into his night. The intrigue was no longer just about curiosity. It was about shared understanding. A silent connection forged in the quiet hours. Elvis's subtle acknowledgement of his hours left Sarah with a sense of quiet exhilaration. It wasn't an explicit conversation about his nocturnal charity, but it was enough. It was a recognition that she saw more than just his public persona, more than just the king who baffled his staff with his sleep patterns. She felt a responsibility now, a quiet pledge to herself to honor his unspoken trust. The next few weeks, Sarah found herself adjusting her own schedule almost unconsciously to his. She didn't stay up every night, but she was more aware of his movements. If she saw his Cadillac pull out late, she wouldn't fret about her own sleep. She would instead imagine him on his selfless errands to the very aid, bringing quiet comfort to those in need. She began to notice other patterns too. He seemed particularly restless on nights after a major show or a long recording session, as if the roar of the crowd, the intensity of performance, left him too wired for conventional sleep, driving him to channel that energy into something else. It was as if he needed to ground himself to connect with a different kind of reality after experiencing the surreal heights of his fame. One afternoon, Sarah was in the kitchen helping load a dishwasher. It was early evening, around 6 p.m., and Elvis had just woken up. He ambled in, still in his silk pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He looked surprisingly young and vulnerable in these unguarded moments. "Mornin', everyone," he drawled, his voice a little husky from sleep. Cook chuckled. Already preparing a late afternoon breakfast for him, he spotted Sarah. "Still here, darlin'?" he asked with a warm smile. "You work hard." "Just trying to keep things in order, Mr. Presley," she replied, a faint blush on her cheeks. He poured himself a glass of orange juice. "Order is a good thing," he mused, looking out the window at the twilight sky. "But sometimes life ain't orderly. Sometimes you gotta make your own order, even when it means living a little differently." He turned back, leaning against the counter. "People, they see what they want to see, you know." He took a sip of his juice. "They see the flashy cars, the jumpsuits, the big houses, and they think that's it. That's all there is." He looked at her. Then a deep, thoughtful gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. "There's more to it, ain't there? There's always more to it for everyone." He wasn't talking about himself explicitly, but Sarah knew he was. He was talking about the hidden depths, the unseen efforts. He was hinting at the purpose behind his strange life, the very core of his being that he kept shielded from the public eye. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "There's always more." A flicker of something, understanding, perhaps even gratitude, passed through his eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Some things are best kept quiet, for the right reasons. He paused, looking out the window again, then continued as if speaking to himself. "When you're given a lot, you got a responsibility, not just to yourself or your family, but to others, to those who ain't got nothing. And sometimes the best way to help is to do it without anyone knowing about it. No fuss, no fanfare." He looked back at her, his express, "Perious. If you put a spotlight on it, it changes things. It makes it about you, but it ain't about you. It's about them." He tapped his chest gently. "It's about the heart, and the heart doesn't need a stage." He was essentially telling her everything without telling her anything specific. He was explaining the philosophy behind his night world. The profound reason for his strange sleep schedule wasn't just about charity, it was about the purity of the act. He didn't want his fame to overshadow the needs of the people he was helping. He didn't want his generosity to be seen as a publicity stunt. He wanted it to be pure, untainted, from his heart to theirs. "I understand, Mr. Presley," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I really do," he smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good, darling, good." He finished his juice and pushed off the counter. "Now I think I'll go take a look at those horses. Then maybe get some breakfast with the boys." As he left the kitchen, the sunlight streaming in through the windows seemed to follow him, illuminating a man who, despite his fame, lived a quiet, humble truth. Sarah felt a profound sense of Graceland anymore. She was an unwitting guardian of a beautiful secret, a silent witness to the king's true, compassionate heart. The mystery of his sleep schedule was now fully unveiled to her, not by words, but by the quiet power of his sincerity and the purity of his purpose. After Elvis's subtle revelation, Sarah felt a new connection to Graceland and its enigmatic owner. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She felt like she was part of something bigger, something quiet and profoundly good. Her respect for Elvis deepened immeasurably. She started looking for ways to quietly support his secret work without being intrusive. She'd make sure the storeroom for supplies was always well stocked and tidied, anticipating his needs. She'd quietly confirm if specific Mafia members were available to accompany him on a given night. Just by observing their schedules, one particularly cold November night, a powerful storm was brewing. Rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled through the trees. Sarah was still up, finishing a detailed inventory of Elvis's considerable wardrobe. Most of the staff had left early, and the house felt vast and empty. Around 1 a.m., she heard the familiar soft footsteps on the grand staircase. She knew it was Elvis. Her heart quickened. Even on a night like this, he was going out. This wasn't just dedication. It was unwavering commitment. She heard him talking quietly to Dave, the night security guard near the front door. "Gonna be rough out there tonight, Dave. Keep an eye on things." "You be careful too, boss," Dave replied, his voice laced with concern. "Roads are getting slick." Sarah decided to take a risk. She emerged from the wardrobe room, trying to look casual. "Mr. Presley?" she said, her voice a little louder than intended in the quiet house. He turned, surprised. He was dressed in a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around his neck, and a sturdy pair of boots. He looked ready for an expedition. "Sarah, what are you still doing up?" "Just finished up, I heard the storm. You're going out?" she asked. Feigning innocent curiosity, he hesitated, then sighed. A slight frown on his face. He knew, she knew. "Got to some folks, depend on it, this weather makes it even worse for them." He gestured vaguely. Sarah took a deep breath. "Sir, with respect maybe, I could help. Just for tonight I can help you carry the boxes, or navigate if the roads are bad. I'm a good driver, even in the rain." It was bold, perhaps too bold, but she couldn't bear the thought of him going out alone in such conditions, especially when she knew what he was doing. Elvis looked at her, his eyes serious, contemplating. Dave shifted uncomfortably beside him. No one had ever directly offered to join his secret missions before. After a long moment, Elvis let out a small chuckle. "You're a persistent one, ain't you, Sarah?" He ran a hand through his hair. "It's not a pretty sight, darling, and it's quiet work. No cameras, no applause." "I know, sir," she said, her voice firm, "and I don't need any of that. I want to help, if I can." He studied her for another moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a dazzling stage smile, but a warm, genuine one that reached his eyes. "All right, Sarah, get yourself a warm coat and some waterproof boots. But you gotta promise me something." "Anything, sir." This stays between us and anyone else who already knows. No talking outside these walls. Understand?" His voice was low, serious. "Understood," she said, feeling a surge of adrenaline and honor. "Absolutely." "Good," he said, nodding. "Dave, you stay here. We won't be long." Sarah practically flew to her quarters, pulling on her thickest coat and her sturdy walking boots. She was filled with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. She was about to step into the king's night world, a world few were privileged to see. When she returned, Elvis was waiting by the Cadillac, the trunk already open, revealing the familiar brown boxes along with some extra blankets and a large thermos. He handed her a flashlight. "Let's go then," he said, a quiet determination in his voice. They drove in silence for a while, the windshield wipers struggling against the deluge. The bright lights of Memphis faded behind them as they ventured into less familiar territory, into the older, poorer parts of the city. The streets became narrower, the houses smaller, many in disrepair, their windows dark. Finally, Elvis pulled up beside a rundown, two-story building. It looked like an old warehouse or a community hall with a worn sign that read, "Memphis Helping Hand." It was the place the old man George managed. "This is it," Elvis said, turning off the engine. "This is where the magic happens." He didn't mean magic in the sense of illusion, but the magic of human kindness quietly given. Sarah's heart was pounding. The unveiling was complete. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in the king's true, profound calling. Stepping out of the Cadillac into the biting wind and torrential rain, Sarah felt the full weight of the night. It was dark and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and luxury of Graceland. The Memphis Helping Hand building looked even more desolate, up close, its paint peeling, its windows dark except for a faint glow from inside. Elvis didn't hesitate. He grabbed a box, and Sarah quickly followed suit, her arms wrapping around a surprisingly heavy package of what felt like canned goods and blankets. They walked quickly to a side door where Elvis knocked a specific rhythm, 3 quick taps then 2 slower ones. The door opened almost immediately, revealing the old man George, his face etched with worry, but his eyes lighting up. When he saw Elvis, and "Oh, bless your heart, child, he brought help." He pulled them inside out of the elements, the teen. A large open space served as a makeshift dormitory, with cots lined up on one side. On the other, a small kitchen area and tables. Sarah saw about a dozen children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, huddled together under blankets, some already asleep. Others looking up with wide, curious eyes. Their clothes were worn. These were the children George had spoken of, the ones Elvis was helping. The air was chilly, despite a small space heater humming in the corner. "Heat's been a problem this week, Elvis," George whispered, shaking his head. "The old furnace is acting up, and food's been tight." Elvis's jaw tightened. He nodded grimly. "That's why we're here, George. Got a truckload of supplies, and enough to get that furnace fixed." He gestured to the boxes they'd brought in and then pulled out another thick envelope, handing it to George. Sarah watched, her chest tightening with emotion. She had read about poverty, seen pictures, but to witness it firsthand in her own city was profoundly moving. And to see Elvis, the global superstar, here in his quiet, unassuming place was even more so. He worked quickly, efficiently. He and Sarah unloaded box after box from the Cadillac. Food, warm blankets, simple toys, school supplies, even some basic medical kits. As they brought in each load, the children's eyes widened, a flicker of hope and excitement replacing the weariness. Elvis didn't just drop off the supplies. He knelt down beside the cots, speaking softly to the children who were still awake. He asked their names, gently ruffled the young boy's hair, and talked about school with a shy teenage girl. He shared a quiet joke, eliciting small, hesitant smiles. He made each child feel seen, important, loved. Sarah watched him, mesmerized. He wasn't performing. He was simply connecting one human being to another. His touch was gentle, his voice filled with a genuine tenderness that was rarely seen on stage. He was the most famous man in the world, yet here he was just a kind man bringing comfort and hope. He comes here almost every week, George told Sarah in a low voice, while Elvis was distributing some warm cocoa to the older kids. Sometimes, more often, if things are bad, never misses. He doesn't want anyone to know. Says it's better that way, no fuss, no bother, just help. George's voice was filled with an almost reverent admiration. These children, they wouldn't have much of anything without him. He saved us more times than I can count. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This was the king's strange sleep schedule. This was his nocturnal life. He stayed up late. He drove through the night. He defied normal hours. All for this, for these children, for people who had nothing and no one else to turn to. He truly was doing it for the heart, as he'd said. After about an hour, all the supplies were unloaded and distributed. The furnace repairman George had called was already on his way, and the building would soon be warm. The children, now fed and with new blankets, were settling down, a sense of peace filling the room. Elvis stood for a moment looking around the humble shelter. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction mixed with a hint of sorrow for the hardships these families faced. He clasped George's hand once more. "You keep up the good work. George, you're doing God's work here." "Only with your help," Elvis George said, his voice thick with emotion. As they walked back to the Cadillac, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Sarah felt a profound shift within her. She had come to Graceland expecting glamour and excitement. She had found something far more precious. The quiet, hidden humanity of a man who used his immense blessings to anonymously uplift those in the deepest shadows. King's sleep schedule was no longer a mystery. It was a testament to his profound compassion. The drive back to Graceland was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, different from the quiet of their journey out. The storm had broken, and a few stars were beginning to peek through the clouds. Sarah felt exhausted, but her heart was full. "You all right, darlin'?" Elvis asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. "Yes, Mr. Presley. More than all right," Sarah replied. "Thank you for letting me come, for letting me see." He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "It's not something I usually share, not with many folks. It's important to me that it stays quiet. Not for my sake, you understand." "I understand," Sarah assured him, her voice sincere. "Completely. I won't say a word to anyone, ever." He glanced at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "I believe you. I wouldn't have brought you if I didn't." He paused again. "It ain't easy having so much, when you know there are folks living like that. I grew up with nothing, you know. I remember what it's like to be hungry, to be cold, to feel like no one cares." He spoke slowly, thoughtfully, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "When I was a boy, my mama and daddy, they always taught me to help others. Even when we had little, we shared what we could. It stuck with me, even when things changed, when I got all of this." He gestured vaguely towards the unseen Graceland. "That feeling never went away. The need to help," he sighed, a deep, weary sound. "It's hard to do good when everyone's watching. They twist it. They make it something else, a publicity stunt, or a tax. Right off. And it ain't none of that. It's what I gotta do for my soul." He was not just a performer. He was a man grappling with immense fame and an even more immense heart, trying to reconcile the two. His peculiar schedule was his way of creating a private space for his true self to thrive. "The nights are peaceful too," he continued, a softer tone entering his voice. "No phones ringing, no crowds, no schedules. Just me and the road and a chance to do something real, something that matters." He looked at her again, his eyes gentle. "That's why I keep these hours, Sarah. It's not a choice, it's a need to connect with something real, to feel like I'm doing some good in this crazy world." "It's amazing, Mr. Presley," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Truly amazing." He smiled faintly. "Just Elvis, darling. You saw the real me tonight. Call me Elvis." The simple permission felt like a profound gift. It was a formal initiation into his inner circle, a mark of trust that few outsiders ever received. She was no longer just an employee. She was a confidant, a quiet ally. When they pulled back into Graceland, the first faint hint of dawn was coloring the sky. The house looked immense and silent, waiting. Elvis parked the Cadillac, and they both moved with a newfound understanding. Sarah helped him carry the last few empty boxes inside. As they stood in the silent foyer, the first rays of sunlight painting the stained glass above the front door in vibrant hues, Elvis turned to her. "Thank you, Sarah, for tonight, for understanding." "Thank you, Elvis," she replied the name, feeling natural on her tongue for the first time, "for showing me." He nodded a quiet acknowledgement. "Get some sleep now, darling. You earned it." He gave her a tired but genuine smile, then turned and ascended the grand staircase, his footsteps soft, heading for his own delayed rest. Sarah watched him go, a profound sense of warmth spreading through her. The king's strange sleep schedule was no longer a baffling eccentricity. It was a secret act of love, a testament to his deeply compassionate spirit, and she was now a silent keeper of that beautiful truth. Her life at Graceland had just gained a depth she never could have imagined. From that night forward, Sarah's role at Graceland subtly shifted. While her official duties remained the same, there was an unspoken understanding between her and Elvis. She became a silent co-conspirator, a quiet support system for his nocturnal missions. She discreetly checked the weather forecast for late-night storms, ensuring the Cadillac was ready, or making sure extra blankets were available in the supply room. She'd always make sure a thermos of hot coffee or cocoa was available for him, should he need it before heading out into the cold Memphis night. She never asked directly about his plans, but her subtle preparedness spoke volumes, and Elvis noticed. He didn't always acknowledge it with words, but with a nod, a knowing glance, or a rare private smile that warmed her heart. Sometimes, if she was still up when he was preparing to leave, he'd simply say, "Night, darlin'," and she'd know he was about to embark on his quiet journey. Occasionally, if the mission was particularly large, or if he felt the need for an extra set of hands, he would simply say, "Care to join me, Sarah?" And she would, without hesitation. These were some of the most profound and humbling experiences of her life. She saw the raw poverty, the quiet desperation, but also the immense gratitude and the small sparks of hope his visits ignited. She learned more about the different places he visited: a small, struggling soup kitchen that served meals to the homeless, a women's shelter in a discreet location, a community center that provided tutoring and after-school programs for at-risk youth. Each place was a testament to his far-reaching anonymous kindness. One evening, after helping him deliver a large load of school supplies to the community center, they were on their way back to Graceland. Elvis was quiet. "You know, Sarah," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "sometimes, after a big show, all that noise, all that adulation, it feels empty, almost like it's not real. It's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but it's not solid." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But coming here to places like this is real. This is where I feel like I'm making a real difference. Like my life means something beyond the records in the movies. It cleanses my soul. You know, it keeps me grounded." For Elvis, his secret charity work wasn't just about helping others. It was about nourishing his own spirit, about finding meaning beyond the dazzling, often overwhelming world of fame. His strange sleep schedule was his sanctuary, his way of maintaining balance, of staying true to the humble, generous man he truly was, beneath the iconic persona. She also saw a different side of the Memphis Mafia members who sometimes accompanied him. Red and Sunny, who seemed like tough, no-nonsense bodyguards in public, transformed into gentle giants in the presence of those in need. They helped distribute supplies, played briefly with the children, and treated everyone with respect and quiet dignity. It was clear they too understood the sacredness of these missions. One very late night, after a particularly long trip delivering medical supplies to a free clinic, Elvis and Sarah sat in the kitchen at Graceland, nursing mugs of hot chocolate. The house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Elvis looked tired, but his eyes held a deep contentment. "You're a good soul, Sarah," he said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "A real good soul. Not many would understand this, or want to be a part of it." "It's an honor, Elvis," she replied honestly. "To see you, to see this side of you, it's truly inspiring." He smiled, a soft, rare smile that held a touch of melancholy. "Just keep it safe, all right? It's important that it stays our little secret." "It will," she promised, her heart swelling with loyalty and respect. The strange sleep schedule no longer baffled anyone around Elvis. It was simply part of his legendary enigma. But for Sarah, it was now an open book, a testament to a king who used his nights not for rest, but for quiet, profound acts of love. And in sharing this secret, a unique and heartwarming bond had formed, one that would last a lifetime. Years passed and Sarah remained at Graceland, her role evolving, her understanding of Elvis deepening with every passing day and night. She continued to be a silent guardian of his secret, watching as the king continued his nocturnal rounds, bringing aid and comfort to the unseen corners of Memphis. The bafflement of the public and even new staff members about his strange sleep schedule never truly faded. The theories still circulated. Insomnia, creative eccentricity, perhaps even a secret life of wild parties. But Sarah knew the truth, and it was far more profound than any of those rumors. She saw the quiet moments. Elvis, meticulously packing boxes himself, checking lists of supplies, making sure every child in George's care had a new pair of shoes, or that the women's shelter had enough warm coats for winter. She witnessed his deep personal investment, his profound empathy for those less fortunate. His strange hours weren't just about discretion. They were also practical. People he helped often couldn't come during the day, or their needs were most acute at night. The anonymity of darkness allowed both him and them a sense of privacy and safety. It was a schedule dictated by compassion, not by convenience or caprice. Sarah noticed how these quiet acts fueled him, how they seemed to provide a balance to the relentless demands of his fame. After a night of humble service, even if he only got a few hours of sleep before a packed schedule of rehearsals or meetings, he seemed refreshed in a way that sleep alone couldn't achieve. It was a spiritual replenishment. "Keeps me human, Sarah," he once told her during one of their late-night hot chocolate sessions in the kitchen. "All that noise, all that glory, it can make you forget who you are. This reminds me." And indeed it did. He was Elvis Presley, the king, larger than life. But he was also just Elvis, a man with a generous heart, a deep sense of responsibility, and an unshakable connection to his roots. Sarah eventually moved on from Graceland, pursuing her own dreams. But the lessons and the trust Elvis had imparted never left her. She carried the memory of his quiet kindness, his humble acts of charity as a precious secret. When she heard people talk about his eccentricities or criticize his lifestyle, she would just smile gently, knowing a truth they could never fathom. Years later, after Elvis's passing, the world mourned the loss of a legend. Tributes poured in, celebrating his music, his charisma, his impact on culture. But Sarah remembered the man behind the legend, the man who sacrificed normal sleep for profound purpose, the man who quietly gave his time and his heart to those in need, without seeking a single word of praise. She saw news reports about his will, about the charities he supported, the quiet generosity he extended to so many. Some of his secret acts of kindness became known, but never the full extent, never the deep personal commitment expressed through those strange late-night excursions. The legend of Elvis Presley grew, his music timeless. But for Sarah, the true measure of the king was not in his gold records or his sold-out concerts. It was in the quiet hours of the night, in the dim light of a rundown community center, in the grateful eyes of a child receiving a warm blanket. King's strange sleep schedule, once a baffling enigma, became, for those few who understood it, the most heartwarming testament to his enduring legacy. It was a symbol of a man who, despite living in the brightest spotlight, found his deepest truth and shared his greatest love in the profound quiet. It was the story of Elvis Presley's magnificent, truly royal heart.